Ever feel like the world is maybe like teetering on the edge of something big, like some major shift?
Yeah.
That's kind of the feeling people may have had 3,000 years ago
Oh, yeah.
during the Bronze Age collapse.
Uh,
It wasn't just one event.
right.
Think of it more as like a domino effect lasting over a century.
Yeah.
Invasions, earthquakes, droughts, you name it.
Wow.
It basically crippled these empires that seemed untouchable, you know?
It's true. Around 1150 BC,
Yeah.
the late Bronze Age world,
Uh-huh.
which was a globally connected world, much like our own today,
Right.
was
Yeah.
just sent into a tailspin.
Today we're going beyond just the fall itself
Right.
and diving into the aftermath, what happened next.
I like it.
Using historian Eric Klein's book,
Mm-hmm.
After 1177 BC,
Okay.
we're going to be exploring how 8 different civilizations faced this challenge.
Okay.
Some barely made it, others actually thrived in the chaos. It
Interesting.
really makes you think,
Yeah.
how would we measure up against such a monumental shift?
Well, and that's the fascinating part, isn't it?
Yeah.
Dr. Klein doesn't just recount the history.
Right.
He uses these ancient societies as case studies
Oh, interesting.
in resilience,
Mhm.
innovation,
Right.
adaptation, things that we definitely need today.
Absolutely. But before we jump into individual civilizations,
Okay.
let's kind of set the stage, paint a picture of what was happening.
Right.
You're not talking about just one bad year here,
No.
but a cascade of events.
Uh-huh.
Think sea peoples invading
Right.
earthquakes, like literally shaking the foundations of these societies.
Oh.
And then, of course, the knock-on effects.
Yeah.
Droughts leading to famine, disease spreading like wildfire.
And it's important to note, this wasn't like a descent into a dark age like some might imagine.
Right.
Even amidst all this turmoil,
Uh-huh.
there were these bright spots, new technologies coming up, new ways of thinking.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's complex, and that's what makes it so fascinating.
Let's start with the civilization that we all probably picture most
Oh,
when we think ancient, right?
yeah.
Egypt, pyramids, pharaohs, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
But how did this seemingly unshakable society
Yeah.
deal with the Bronze Age collapse?
They survived,
Okay.
but it wasn't a walk in the park.
Right.
They held on to their societal structure.
Mhm.
They kept their pharaohs,
Right.
but they faced some pretty intense internal power struggles.
Really?
Yeah, imagine multiple pharaohs all vying for control,
Oh,
essentially creating these mini kingdoms within Egypt itself.
multiple pharaohs. That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It definitely created instability.
Yeah.
Dr. Klein categorizes Egypt as adapting,
Okay.
meaning they didn't collapse entirely, but their golden age was definitely over.
So not exactly a shining victory,
Right.
but they managed to hold on to at least some semblance of their former selves.
Right, and this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Some historians suggest that we view Egypt at this time not as one large entity,
Oh,
but more as a collection of these smaller kingdoms.
interesting.
And this could be seen as a different type of resilience,
Okay.
a distributed, decentralized kind of survival.
That totally flips the script on how we usually view ancient Egypt, right?
It does.
As this unified, powerful force.
Yeah.
It just goes to show that even in what we consider collapse,
Yeah,
there can be all these nuances and unexpected forms of adaptation.
absolutely.
What about the Canaanites?
The Canaanites, yeah.
They were a significant presence in the region, weren't they?
Absolutely. And their story is particularly interesting because it's a real mixed bag of winners and losers.
Oh,
Dr. Klein divides them geographically,
right.
northern, central, and southern Canaanites,
Yep.
and each had their own kind of distinct fate.
So which group came out on top?
Believe it or not,
Okay.
it was the northern Canaanites,
Okay.
or who we know as the
The
Phoenicians.
Phoenicians.
They actually thrived during this time of upheaval.
Wow. Talk about taking advantage of a bad situation, huh?
Exactly. With all the major trade routes in disarray,
Yeah.
they stepped in and they became the masters of the Mediterranean.
Okay.
They connected these different regions,
Yeah.
spreading their culture and their innovations.
Okay, give us some specifics.
Yeah.
All right, what innovations are we talking about here?
Two major ones.
Okay.
First, they standardized the alphabet,
Oh, wow.
making it much easier to learn and use.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what?
Okay.
That's the foundation for the Greek
Mhm.
and later the Latin alphabet,
Wow.
the one that we use today.
So we can thank the Phoenicians for our writing system.
It is quite a legacy.
That's incredible.
Their other big contribution was the production of purple dye.
Purple dye. Okay.
It became a luxury item, a real symbol of royalty,
Right.
and the Phoenicians were the experts at making it.
Talk about a lucrative business model, huh?
It was.
Cornering the market on purple dye
Mm-hmm.
in the ancient world,
Mm-hmm.
that must have been pretty profitable.
It was.
The Phoenicians are such a prime example of how a civilization can not just survive a crisis,
Mm-hmm.
but actually use it as a springboard to even greater heights.
They were adaptable,
Right.
innovative,
Right.
and ultimately very successful.
A real comeback story.
Yeah.
What about the other Canaanites?
The other Canaanites.
Did they share in this success?
Well, the Central Canaanites,
Mm.
specifically those in what's now Lebanon,
Okay.
they seem to have done okay.
Okay.
The archaeological evidence is a little thinner there,
Right.
but what we do have suggests they remained relatively stable.
All right. So they weren't flourishing like the Phoenicians, but they were holding their own.
Yeah, holding their own.
What about the southern
The
Canaanites?
Southern Canaanites.
I understand their story is a bit more complicated.
It is, yeah. This is the group that occupied the land
Mm-hmm.
that later became the kingdoms of Israel and Judah.
Okay.
And their story is intertwined with some of the biggest historical and religious
I
narratives.
think we're talking about the Exodus, right?
Exactly.
The story of the Israelites fleeing Egypt
Mhm.
and conquering Canaan.
Exactly. Did it happen?
Yeah.
If so, when?
Right.
And how did it affect these southern Canaanites?
Right.
These are questions that scholars are still grappling with today.
So what does Dr. Klein say about this possible connection?
Well, he lays out several possibilities,
Okay.
and he emphasizes that there's no easy answer.
Right.
One theory is that the southern Canaanites were wiped out
Okay.
or absorbed by groups like the Israelites.
Mhm.
Another suggests that they actually became the Israelites,
Oh, wow.
or at least a significant part of that emerging culture.
So they either vanished, blended in, or transformed completely.
It's a pretty wide range of possibilities.
It is.
And the evidence that we have is open to interpretation.
Right.
We see archaeological signs of Canaanite city-states collapsing,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, new kingdoms like Israel, Judah, Edom, Moab emerge.
Wow.
Were these entirely separate groups? Or did they incorporate elements of that existing Canaanite population?
It's like the Southern Canaanite story is a puzzle with some missing pieces.
It is.
And each new discovery could completely change your understanding of what happened to them.
Exact.
Okay, we've talked about Egypt and the
Mhm.
Canaanites,
Mhm.
who clearly had very different experiences after this collapse.
Yeah.
Now let's shift our focus to the Mycenaeans.
The Mycenaeans.
They were the dominant force in mainland Greece during the late Bronze Age, right?
They were, but unfortunately, the Bronze Age collapse hit them really hard.
Oh.
Their sophisticated palace-based system was shattered.
Wow.
Their writing system, Linear B, just vanished,
Mm-hmm.
and their powerful city-states went into a steep decline.
So a much harsher outcome than what we saw in Egypt.
Definitely.
Okay.
Dr. Klein places them in a category he calls coping,
Coping.
which suggests they struggled to adapt to this drastically changed world around them.
Does that mean Mycenaean culture disappeared entirely?
Not quite. Dr. Klein uses this really fascinating term, permeable membrane,
Permeable membrane.
to describe this period of transition.
Interesting.
It means that while some aspects of their culture vanished,
Uh-huh.
others seeped through and were kind of woven into later Greek society.
Okay, can you give us an example of what survived this permeable membrane?
Think of their gods and goddesses.
Okay.
Names like Zeus, Hera, Poseidon.
Right.
These were all deities worshipped by the Mycenaeans,
Mhm.
and they remained central to Greek religion centuries later.
Wow.
It shows that even in a collapse,
Yeah.
some cultural elements can prove remarkably resilient.
So their civilization may have crumbled, but their gods lived on,
Lived on.
eventually becoming part of the Greek pantheon we know today.
Yes, and it reminds us that even in profound change,
Yeah.
cultural threads can weave their way through time.
That's fascinating.
What's also interesting is that Linear B, their writing system,
Uh-huh.
was lost, but eventually the Phoenician alphabet made its way to Greece.
Right. Was adapted
Mhm.
and became the foundation of the Greek writing system that we know today.
Wow. So indirectly, the collapse actually led to a new writing system that would go on to have a huge impact on Greek culture and literature.
It did.
It's like one door closed,
Yeah,
but another, perhaps even more significant one, opened.
exactly. It highlights the unexpected ways that historical events
Right.
can have these long-lasting consequences.
Okay, so the Mycenaeans were hit hard,
Uh-huh.
but they didn't completely disappear.
No.
What about their neighbors on Crete?
Okay.
The Minoans.
The Minoans.
They had close cultural ties to the Mycenaeans, so I imagine they suffered a similar fate.
On the surface, it seems that way.
Okay.
Palaces were destroyed, the political landscape was reshaped,
Right.
and their writing system, Linear A, still remains a mystery to this day.
Right.
But recent archaeological work on Crete actually paints a slightly different picture.
Oh, how so?
Well, for one thing, the population decline on Crete might not have been as severe as initially thought.
Interesting.
And while those grand Minoan palaces were abandoned, life in the smaller towns and villages seems to have continued, albeit transformed.
So a more decentralized, less palace-centric society emerged.
Exactly, a little more down to earth, perhaps.
Right.
And some scholars even suggest that the Minoans might have experienced what they call a successful collapse.
Successful collapse. Now that's an interesting concept.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Essentially, it suggests that sometimes the collapse of a complex system can actually create the conditions for a more resilient, adaptable society to emerge.
Wow, so it's almost like a phoenix rising from the ashes?
Almost like that, yeah.
Okay, so the Minoans, like the Egyptians, kind of defy this simple narrative of complete decline.
Yeah.
There's nuance, adaptation, and maybe even opportunity in their story.
Opportunity, yeah.
Let's move on to another fascinating group. The Cypriots.
The Cypriots, okay.
They played a key role in the whole transition from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age, didn't they?
They did, and their story is all about metal.
Okay.
They were already renowned for their expertise in copper production, and it seems like this knowledge gave them a head start when it came to working with iron.
So they were ahead of the curve when that whole bronze to iron shift happened.
Exactly. As the Bronze Age was ending and access to tin, which is a key ingredient in bronze, became more difficult, the Cypriots were perfectly positioned to take advantage of this readily available iron ore.
What kind of evidence do we have for this?
Well, we found archaeological evidence of early iron production on Cyprus. Even more telling, we find Cypriot iron objects, including some made of both iron and bronze in other regions. This suggests they were not only producing iron, but they were also trading these goods and perhaps even sharing their knowledge.
So the Cypriots were kind of like the pioneers of the Iron Age.
Yeah.
Spreading this new technology across the Mediterranean.
It's certainly a plausible interpretation and a fascinating one.
It is.
Their metallurgical expertise played a crucial role in that shift from bronze to iron. And that shift had a ripple effect on everything.
Wow.
Warfare, agriculture, even daily life.
Okay, we've covered the Egyptians, the Canaanites, the Mycenaeans, the Minoans, and the Cypriots. That leaves us with two more civilizations to explore. The Hittites and the Assyrians and Babylonians. Let's start with the Hittites.
The Hittites.
They were a powerful empire in Anatolia. But it seems their fate after the collapse was one of the most dramatic.
It was a dramatic fall from grace. The Hittite Empire, once seemingly invincible, just crumbled rapidly.
Wow.
And this is where Dr. Klein's concept of fragility comes in.
Fragility, okay.
He argues that the Hittites, despite their outward strength, were actually more vulnerable than they appeared.
What made them so vulnerable? Was it just bad luck? Or were there underlying weaknesses?
It seems like it was a combination of factors that contributed to their downfall. Internally, they were plagued by these power struggles, competition for the throne. There's also evidence they suffered from outbreaks of disease.
Wow.
But perhaps the most important factor was their lack of flexibility.
Really?
They didn't adapt as well as some of the other civilizations we've talked about.
So they were too rigid. Too reliant on their existing power structures to adapt to the changing circumstances.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay.
They didn't seem to have a plan B.
Wow.
They lacked those backup systems, the redundancy that might have allowed them to survive in a world that was suddenly very different.
So their lack of foresight, their lack of flexibility, ultimately contributed to their downfall.
I think so.
A cautionary tale indeed. Did anything survive from the Hittite civilization?
Well, while the Hittite Empire in central Anatolia was indeed destroyed in North Syria, smaller Hittite kingdoms often called Neo-Hittites,
okay,
managed to survive.
Interesting.
They preserved aspects of Hittite traditions, language, and religious practices, albeit on a much smaller scale.
So, like the Mycenaeans, they left behind a legacy, even if their empire was gone?
Exactly. And it shows that the collapse of a civilization doesn't always mean the complete eradication of a culture.
Right.
Sometimes pieces remain, they adapt, and they find new ways to flourish.
Okay, that leaves us with the Assyrians and Babylonians.
Assyrians and Babylonians, all right.
These are names that we strongly associate with ancient Mesopotamia.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing they fared better than the Hittites?
They did, and their story is really intriguing. They seem to have weathered that initial storm of the Bronze Age collapse relatively well, maintaining their societal structures, their kings, and their complex systems of governance.
Why were they so resilient? What was their secret?
It's hard to say for sure, but a few factors might have been at play.
Okay.
Their location on the Tigris and Euphrates rivers gave them access to these vital resources, and they had this long tradition of strong leadership and efficient administration.
So a combination of geography, strong leadership, and just experience in dealing with challenges helped them navigate the crisis.
Perhaps, interestingly, there's a gap of about 75 years right after the collapse, where we have very few inscriptions from the Assyrians. It's like this historical black box. And we're not sure exactly what was going on during that time, but by around 1100 BC, the inscriptions pick up again, and we see the Assyrians continuing to thrive.
So they went silent for a while, but then re-emerged stronger than ever.
Exactly. And eventually, the Assyrians would go on to establish a vast empire, the Neo-Assyrian Empire, which stretched across a large part of the Near East.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing from there, was it?
It wasn't.
Didn't they face difficulties later on?
They did. Even the Assyrians weren't immune to the long-term effects of the Bronze Age collapse. Droughts, famines, conflict. These continued to plague the region. There's even evidence that at certain points, the Assyrians were forced to resort to some pretty desperate measures, such as cannibalism to survive.
Wow, that paints a pretty grim picture. A reminder that even the most resilient societies can be pushed to their absolute limits.
Absolutely.
So their story is one of initial success, followed by periods of hardship and adaptation, ultimately culminating in the rise of this new empire.
Yes. And it highlights the cyclical nature of history, rise and fall, collapse and renewal. These are recurring patterns. And the Assyrians and Babylonians are a prime example of a civilization that went through these cycles in a remarkably dramatic way.
So after examining all 8 civilizations, it's clear that there's no one-size-fits-all answer to surviving a collapse. It's a complex mix of factors, internal resilience, adaptability, and maybe even a little bit of luck.
And a little bit of luck. Welcome back to our deep dive into the aftermath of the Bronze Age collapse.
It really was a whirlwind tour of ancient history.
It was.
From the opportunistic Phoenicians who turned chaos into opportunity. To the resilient Egyptians who held on despite all that internal turmoil. We saw a whole range of responses to this massive upheaval.
We did.
And now I think it's time to kind of zoom out a bit and look at some of the bigger picture questions Dr. Klein raises.
Yeah, I like that.
What can these ancient societies teach us about the nature of collapse itself, the factors that contribute to resilience, and, you know, maybe even what choices we might face in a world that's constantly changing?
That's the fascinating part, isn't it?
It is.
So let's start with the idea of collapse itself.
Okay.
What does it really mean for a civilization to collapse? Is it this sudden, catastrophic event, or is it more of a gradual process of decline and transformation?
That's a key question.
It is.
And I think Dr. Klein is very careful to point out that collapse isn't a one-size-fits-all event.
Right. It can unfold in different ways, over different timescales, and impact different parts of a society in very different ways.
So it's not like flipping a switch and suddenly everything falls apart.
Not necessarily, no.
Really?
In some cases, like the destruction of Ugarit by the Sea Peoples, we see evidence of this really swift and violent collapse.
Yeah.
But in other cases, like the decline of the Mycenaean palace system, it was a much slower process, playing out over decades or even centuries.
So collapse can be fast or slow.
Yeah.
And it can impact different parts of a society in different ways.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But what about resilience?
Resilience?
What allows some societies to bounce back from these kinds of crises?
Right.
While others just crumble?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
The quest for that resilience formula.
Right.
And of course, there's no single answer.
Yeah.
But Dr. Klein does highlight a few factors that seem to contribute to a society's ability to weather the storm.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's hear about these resilience factors.
Right. Well, one crucial factor is adaptability.
Okay.
Societies that can adjust their economic systems, their social structures, even their belief systems in response to changing circumstances, they tend to fare better.
Okay.
The Phoenicians are a great example.
Right.
They didn't see the disruption of those trade routes as a disaster.
Yeah.
They saw it as a chance to forge a new path. Become the new connectors.
Right. They essentially seized the moment.
Seized the moment, yeah.
Became the masters of the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
Spread their alphabet, their purple dye, far and wide.
Exactly.
Talk about making lemonade out of lemons.
That they did.
And that adaptability often goes hand in hand with another factor, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Innovation. Societies that can come up with new technologies, new ideas, new ways of doing things.
Right.
They're just better equipped to handle a crisis.
I think so.
The Cypriots, with their mastery of ironworking, are a perfect example.
They are.
They were at the forefront of a whole new technological age, right?
Right.
The Iron Age.
The Iron Age.
Which had huge implications for the entire region.
Absolutely.
So being able to adapt to change and come up with new solutions, those are key ingredients in this resilience recipe.
They are.
What else helps a society stay afloat during these turbulent times?
Well, social cohesion is incredibly important.
Okay.
Societies that have those strong internal bonds, a sense of shared identity, and a willingness to cooperate in times of crisis, they're just more likely to weather the storm.
Yeah.
They don't fracture and fall apart when things get tough.
It's like they're able to circle the wagons and present a unified front.
Yeah.
Even when they're facing all these external pressures. The Egyptians, despite their internal power struggles and their loss of international influence, they still held on to that core cultural identity and those societal structures.
Yeah.
It seems like that played a role in their ability to persist.
I think so.
For centuries.
Yeah. They didn't splinter into these warring factions.
Right.
Even though there's plenty of internal tension.
Yeah. So we have adaptability, innovation, social cohesion, all crucial elements of resilience.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing there are also external factors that come into play as well, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Things like geography, climate, maybe even just plain luck.
Luck, yeah.
You could be the most adaptable, innovative society in the world.
Yeah.
But if you get hit with a massive volcanic eruption or a devastating earthquake, it's got to be tough to bounce back from something like that.
It's got to be tough.
Dr. Klein acknowledges that those external factors they do play a significant role.
They do.
A civilization located in a geographically advantageous region with access to resources, defensible borders, they might just be more likely to survive than one that's located in a more vulnerable area.
I think that's true.
Just think about how different the story might have been for a civilization located right in the path of those migrating sea peoples compared to one that was further inland.
Absolutely. Sometimes geography really can be destiny.
Right.
It can.
And what about climate?
Climate.
We know that the Bronze Age collapse was partly triggered by a severe drought. Does a society's ability to cope with climate change play a role in their resilience as well?
It definitely can.
Okay.
A society that's able to adapt to shifting climatic conditions, whether it's through agricultural innovation, water management techniques, even migration, is more likely to survive than one that's rigidly tied to a particular environment.
Yeah.
Think about it. If your entire way of life is based on a specific type of agriculture, and then the climate shifts dramatically, you're going to need to find new solutions and or face the consequences.
It makes you think about our current situation with climate change.
It does.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
And the challenges that we're facing today, it's a reminder that those environmental changes can have a profound impact on societies.
They can.
And adapting to those changes is crucial for survival.
Crucial, yeah.
And let's not forget about luck.
Luck, right?
Sometimes it really is just a matter of being in the right place at the right time. Or maybe avoiding a catastrophic natural disaster.
Yeah, a civilization can be doing everything right, making all the right choices, and still get wiped out by a volcanic eruption or a pandemic.
So there's a certain amount of randomness baked into history.
There is.
You can have the best resilience plan in the world, but sometimes fate just throws you a curveball.
Sometimes it does.
That's the harsh reality.
It is.
But I think the key takeaway here is that while we can't control everything, we can certainly increase our chances of survival while focusing on the things that we can control.
Exactly.
That means fostering adaptability, encouraging innovation, strengthening those social bonds, and being mindful of our environmental impact.
Absolutely.
So it's not about being passive victims of fate.
No.
It's about recognizing that we have a role to play in shaping our own destiny, both individually and collectively.
Exactly. And that's where the study of the Bronze Age collapse becomes so relevant to our own time. We live in a world that's facing its own set of interconnected crises.
We do.
Climate change, political instability, economic inequality, emerging pandemics, and the list goes on.
It does feel like we're at a crossroads.
It does.
And the choices that we make today will have these ripple effects far into the future.
They will.
It's a bit daunting to think.
It is daunting.
That even these powerful civilizations like the Hittites could be brought down by this combination of internal and external factors.
It is daunting. I think that's part of why the Bronze Age collapse has captured the imagination of so many people. It serves as this potent reminder
that even the most complex, sophisticated societies are not immune to collapse.
It's a cautionary tale.
It is.
But hopefully also a source of inspiration. If ancient civilizations could find ways to adapt, innovate, and rebuild, then surely we can too.
I think that's the core message here.
Yeah.
It's not about dwelling in despair or embracing fatalism. It's about recognizing that collapse is this recurring theme in human history. But it doesn't have to be the end of the story. What matters is how we respond, how we learn from the past, and how we use that knowledge to build a more resilient and sustainable future.
So we've talked about collapse, we've talked about resilience, and we've touched on the relevance of all this to our own time. But there's one more piece of the puzzle I want to explore. The role of human choice.
Human choice.
Did these ancient societies simply succumb to forces beyond their control? Or were there moments where they made decisions that actively shaped their fate?
That's a fascinating question.
Yeah.
It gets at the heart of historical agency.
Okay.
The ability of individuals and societies to make choices that influence the course of events.
So did these societies have any control over their destiny?
Yeah.
Or were they just kind of swept along by the currents of history?
I think it's probably a bit of both.
Okay.
Clearly, there were those external factors, like climate change and the movements of those sea peoples that they had very little control over. But within those constraints, they still made choices, and those choices had consequences.
Can you give us an example of where we see those human choices shaping the course of events?
Sure. Consider the Hittites,
Okay.
their internal divisions, their inability to adapt to changing economic conditions,
Right.
and perhaps even their over-reliance on military strength.
Right.
These were all factors that contributed to their downfall.
While they couldn't control every external pressure,
Yeah.
they certainly could have made different choices
Okay.
that might have increased their chances of survival.
So they made some strategic missteps
Yeah,
that ultimately made them more vulnerable to collapse.
you could say that. Yeah.
And in contrast, look at the Phoenicians.
Right.
They actively chose to embrace the changing circumstances,
Yeah.
adapt their economic model, and exploit those new opportunities.
They did.
They were, in a sense, architects of their own success.
I think that's right.
So they were proactive rather than reactive.
Proactive. Yeah.
They saw the writing on the wall, And instead of panicking, they decided to write a new chapter.
Right.
A new story.
And I think that's one of the most empowering lessons
Yeah.
we can draw from studying this period of history.
Right.
We're not just these passive bystanders in the face of historical forces.
Right.
We have agency. We have the capacity to make choices.
Yeah.
And those choices can make a real difference.
That's a message I think we all need to hear.
Yeah.
It's not about predicting the future or controlling the uncontrollable.
Right.
It's about recognizing that we have a role to play in shaping our own destiny.
Exactly.
Both individually and as a collective.
And I think that message resonates particularly strongly in our own time as we grapple with these complex global challenges that require collective action and informed decision-making.
Okay, so we've talked about collapse.
Yeah.
We've talked about resilience. And we've touched on the relevance of ancient history to our own time.
Right.
But before we move on, I have one more question.
All right.
Dr. Klein focuses on these 8 specific civilizations.
Yeah.
But the Bronze Age collapse had a much wider impact, didn't it?
Absolutely.
The events of this period had repercussions that extended across the entire Mediterranean world and beyond, right?
And beyond.
Trade networks were disrupted, populations were displaced, new cultural influences began to spread.
It was a truly transformative era, a real turning point in human history.
So it wasn't just these 8 civilizations that were affected.
No.
It was a global event, even by ancient standards.
Yeah, global event.
If it was so widespread, why do we tend to focus on these specific civilizations?
It's partly because these are the civilizations for which we have the most detailed records, thanks to archaeological discoveries and the decipherment of those ancient texts. We have this relatively rich understanding of the political, economic, and social structures of these societies. We can kind of delve into their stories with a level of detail that isn't always possible for other civilizations.
So they're like the best documented case studies, offering us the most detailed glimpse into this whole dynamic.
I think so.
Of collapse and resilience.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that they're just a small sample of the many societies that were affected by these events.
It's like we're looking through a few keyholes at this much vaster and more complex world, trying to piece together the bigger picture.
That's a great analogy.
And as archaeological research continues, new discoveries come to light. Our understanding of the Bronze Age collapse and its global impact is going to continue to evolve.
It will.
So there's still much more to learn.
Yeah.
And the story is far from over.
It's not over.
That's exciting.
It is.
I think we've done a good job of kind of exploring those key takeaways from Dr. Klein's work.
I agree.
We've delved into the nature of collapse itself, the factors that contribute to resilience, the role of human choice, and the global impact of these events.
Yes.
And most importantly, we've made those connections to our own time.
We have.
Exploring how those insights from ancient history can help us understand the challenges that we face and the choices that we might make.
Yeah, it's not just about looking back.
Exactly.
It's about using the past to shed light on the present and to guide us towards a more resilient future.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, I think this is a great place to kind of pause our deep dive for now. But we're not finished yet.
No, we're not.
In our final installment, we're going to bring everything together. We're going to explore those enduring lessons of the Bronze Age collapse and consider what these ancient civilizations can teach us about navigating the complexities of our own time.
Okay, stay tuned, folks. You won't want to miss it. Welcome back to our deep dive into the aftermath of the Bronze Age collapse. It's been a fascinating journey through ancient history, exploring the fates of 8 civilizations, the dynamics of collapse and resilience, and that power of human choice. I have to say, I'm starting to see patterns here, patterns that feel surprisingly relevant to our world today.
I agree. The Bronze Age collapse isn't just this distant historical event, you know? It offers this unique lens through which we can kind of examine our own vulnerabilities, our potential for innovation, and those choices that we make in a world that's constantly evolving.
So let's bring it all together.
Okay.
What are the key takeaways? What can these ancient civilizations teach us about navigating the complexities of our modern world?
Well, one of the most important lessons, I think, is that importance of adaptability. Societies that are flexible, innovative, able to adjust their systems in response to changing circumstances, they have a much better chance of thriving when faced with these challenges.
Like the Phoenicians.
The Phoenicians, yeah.
Who transformed the disruption of those trade routes into an opportunity to build this whole maritime empire. They saw chaos and they thought, game on.
Exactly. They weren't afraid to embrace change and forge those new paths. And I think that's a crucial lesson for us today. Yeah. We live in a world that's increasingly interconnected and in constant flux. We need to be agile, adaptable, and willing to challenge the status quo. Clinging to these outdated systems and ways of thinking just won't cut it in a world that's constantly throwing curveballs.
So being stuck in our ways is a recipe for disaster.
Pretty much.
We need to be willing to evolve and innovate. Just like the Cypriots who mastered ironworking when that whole Bronze Age world was crumbling around them.
Exactly.
They were pioneers of a whole new age, weren't they?
They were. They were at the forefront of this new technological age.
The Iron Age.
Iron Age.
Which had huge implications for the entire region.
And their story underscores another key takeaway. I think innovation is essential.
Innovation, right.
Societies that foster creativity, encourage experimentation, invest in new technology, they're much better equipped to solve problems and create a brighter future.
Makes sense.
Think about it. The challenges we face today, climate change, resource scarcity, social inequalities, they require bold thinking and innovative solutions.
Yeah, we can't just rely on the same old approaches.
We can't, no.
We need to be willing to kind of explore new frontiers. Just like the Cypriots did with iron.
Exactly.
Okay, so adaptability and innovation are essential. But we also talked about the importance of social cohesion. How does that factor into the equation?
It's a critical piece of the puzzle. Societies that have these strong internal bonds, a sense of shared identity, and a willingness to cooperate, they're far more resilient during times of crisis. They're less likely to fracture and fall apart when things get tough. Think about the Egyptians. Despite those internal power struggles and a loss of international standing, they held on to that core cultural identity and those societal structures, allowing them to persist for centuries.
It's like they had this collective immune system. This shared sense of purpose that helped them weather the storm.
I like that analogy.
And I think that's a really powerful lesson for us today.
It is.
We face challenges that require global cooperation and a sense of shared humanity.
Absolutely. It's not just about individual resilience. It's about collective resilience, coming together as a community, a nation, or even a global society to solve problems that affect us all. We need to find ways to bridge divides, build empathy, and foster that sense of shared purpose.
It's a tall order.
It is a tall order.
But I think the alternative is pretty grim. If we can't find ways to work together, we risk repeating the mistakes of the past.
We do.
And speaking of mistakes,
the
Bronze Age collapse, it wasn't caused by a single event, was it?
It wasn't, no.
It was a result of this complex interplay of factors. Climate change, migrations, economic disruptions, political instability.
You're right.
It all feels kind of familiar somehow, doesn't it?
It's eerily familiar.
It is.
The Bronze Age collapse reminds us that these systems are interconnected. One event can trigger this whole cascade of consequences, each amplifying the impact of the others.
It's like a domino effect.
Yeah, like that domino effect.
Think about it. Climate change, rising temperatures, extreme weather events, disruptions to agriculture and water supplies, mass migrations, political instability, conflict.
It's all interconnected.
It is. We can't afford to address these issues in isolation.
We can't.
We need this more holistic, systemic approach, don't we?
I think so.
We need to connect the dots, see the bigger picture, and understand how our actions have these ripple effects across the entire system.
Absolutely. And that requires a real shift in thinking, a willingness to move beyond those simplistic solutions, and kind of embrace complexity. We need to think in systems, not silos.
Systems, not silos,
We need to understand how our decisions impact not just ourselves, but that entire interconnected web of life.
It's a lot to wrap our heads around.
It is a lot.
Adaptability, innovation, social cohesion, systemic thinking.
Yeah.
It feels like a really tall order.
It does feel like a tall order.
But the Bronze Age collapse reminds us that we're not the first to face these kinds of monumental challenges.
Maybe not the first, no.
And while there are no guarantees, there's also no reason to give in to despair.
No, there isn't.
Humanity has faced dark times before.
Right.
And found a way through.
And found a way through.
Exactly. History is full of examples of societies that have overcome incredible adversity and emerged even stronger.
Emerge stronger, yeah.
The key is to learn from the past. Understand the factors that contribute to both collapse and resilience. And apply those lessons to our own time.
Exactly. It's about using that wisdom of the past to illuminate our path forward.
So the Bronze Age collapse is both a cautionary tale and a source of inspiration.
It is both.
It reminds us that collapse is a recurring pattern in human history.
It is a recurring pattern.
But it doesn't have to be the end of the story.
It doesn't have to.
What matters is how we respond.
How we respond, yeah.
Do we give in to fear and division?
Right.
Or do we kind of embrace the challenge?
Yeah.
With ingenuity, cooperation, and determination to create a better future?
I think that's the most important question we can ask ourselves.
It is.
Dr. Klein doesn't want us to be paralyzed by fear or despair. No. He wants us to be empowered by knowledge and inspired to take action. He wants us to recognize that we have agency, that our choices matter, and that we have the potential to shape our destiny, both individually and collectively.
It's a powerful message.
It is a powerful message.
The Bronze Age collapse isn't just a story about the past.
No.
It's a story about us.
About us, yeah.
About the choices we make and the future that we create.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the Bronze Age collapse.
It's been an incredible journey through time.
Yes.
And I feel like I've gained such valuable insights into our own world.
I'm glad.
Thank you so much for guiding us through this complex and thought-provoking topic.
It's been my pleasure. And to our listeners out there, I encourage you to continue exploring this fascinating period of history.
Absolutely.
There's so much more to discover.
Right.
And each new insight can help us navigate the complexities of our own time and build a more resilient and hopeful future.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.
Until next time.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning from the past to create a better future.